be talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Thursday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. And I think we got ourselves a really fun show planned for everybody tonight. Obviously, Thursday night football is coming up, so I know you want to get in your fix. You want to watch some football. And we got plenty of a little bit of everything for you today here on a Thursday evening. Going to open week 3 of college football is here. And what I want to do is talk about who has the most at stake this week. And I'm not talking about if Michigan loses to Arkansas State or some crazy upset. I'm just talking about teams, coaches, whatever, that something needs to happen for them to get some positive vibes going. From there, we will talk about the realignment news that isn't really that interesting. The Pac-12, here's the thing. Pac-12 in and of itself, not interesting, but I do think there are 2 big realignment stories on the table. These are the ones that matter. I want to discuss them. I want to discuss what is at stake for the future of college sports. And then finally, we previewed the week 3 college football slate. So gives us a little wiggle room to do some college hoops today. I think there's been an interesting couple weeks in the college hoops recruiting scene. Remember, this is the time of the year that coaches can get on the road, see recruits, meet with recruits. Recruits are visiting campus. And so I got 4 or 5 updates that I really do think are worth mentioning, monitoring, etc. here on a Thursday night. Before we get started, if you're not subscribed, make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, if you're listening on podcast, and if you are subscribed on YouTube, or if you are watching on YouTube, make sure to click that subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. By the way, chat's been quiet the last couple episodes. Get involved. Let me know what's on your mind. It can be football. It can be basketball. I don't really care. Hop in the chat. We'll get to some of your questions at the end of the show. And before we get started, we do want to once again thank our partners, Cauli Puffs and CauliPuffs.com. So I've told you about this product. It is an awesome product. They came to me a little while ago. But basically, the bottom line is pretty straightforward, right? Is that we're all football fans. College, pro, you're watching Thursday night, Sunday night, Monday night, all day Saturday, etc. And you're sitting on the couch, you're stuffing food in your face, and sometimes we're not paying attention to what are we even putting in our bodies, okay? And so because of it, this is CauliPuffs.com, or Cauli Puffs, excuse me. You can find them on CauliPuffs.com. This is the snack food that you want around your house during college football season, okay? It is delicious, but it is also healthy. Healthy ingredients, baked, not fried. But here's the crazy part. They got 4 or 5 flavors. This is the alternative to the Doritos, the Fritos, the chips in your snack aisle that are unhealthy, that put on the pounds, that make your gut get a little bit bigger during football season. So for more information, do me a favor. Go to CauliPuffs.com, and you can also find these on Amazon as well. So you're on Amazon, you're buying whatever, throw these in your cart. You will not regret it. It is a delicious alternative. You will enjoy them. Tell Torres tell him that Torres sent you. But CauliPuffs.com, again, is our partner. We appreciate their support. And I'm telling you, man, you got to try these. They have been sent to our house. The Torres family loves them. They are delicious as well as healthy. That's the key part. Not just that it's another snack food. It is that it is a delicious snack food. You got to try. Once you get them the first time, you're going to be hooked. Thank you again to CauliPuffs.com. With that said, it's a Thursday afternoon. There is no more time to waste. So let's go ahead and get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, so here's the deal. So we at Torres Media, we've kind of made this executive decision. You guys and girls as college football fans, you want the preview content starting in the middle of the week. We used to do the preview show on Friday. What I have found, though, is you guys want the content on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, looking ahead to the next week. So we've already previewed week 3 of the college football season. I've given you my picks on all the big games. What I want to do today, by the way, the chat is humming, and I appreciate that. We will get to some of your questions in a minute. But what I want to do now, what I would like to do is talk about who I think has the most at stake in week 3 of the college football season. And here's the thing. I know what people are going to say. Nobody has anything at stake. It's the 12-team playoff era. Anything can happen. You can lose games. I get it. But I do think there are certain teams, certain programs that they need something positive in a certain direction for different reasons. And I want to go ahead and get into the 5 that I believe have the most at stake this week in week 3. And I should mention, I said it off the top, we are not talking about if Tennessee loses to Kent State or if Michigan loses to Arkansas State. We all understand you can't lose those kind of games. So the question now becomes, who has the most at stake heading into week 3 of the college football season? Number 1 to me is actually a no-brainer. It is that guy right there. The guy, listen, we might as well call this Billy Napier Live featuring Aaron Torres, because it feels like all I've talked about over the last 3 weeks is Billy Napier, the state of the Florida football program. Florida is reeling. They lost 2 weeks ago to Miami. And why Billy Napier has so much at stake is because we know what has happened at the quarterback situation. Billy Napier, he lost his starting quarterback to a concussion in week 1. They bring in the backup who was the national high school player of the year a year ago in DJ Lagway. And so as we talked about, and we don't need to relitigate the decision in and of itself, but Billy Napier easily could have stuck with the freshman, rolled with the freshman going into this one. He didn't. He has chosen, and he said on Monday, he said, the plan all along has been to play both quarterbacks. If they are healthy, we're going to play both. And so why Billy Napier has so much at stake is that it's not just that he's on the hot seat. It's that it's not just, I'm telling you, I'm hearing from people in Florida, like if he loses this game, I mean, it could get really ugly really quickly. Like by the end of the month, the guy might be out of a job. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying it's not out of the realm of possibility, okay? But I bring it up because why there is so much at stake is pretty straightforward. It's because not only has he made a decision at quarterback, he's made a decision that I would argue nobody agrees with. Like, that's the crazy part about this Billy Napier story, about this Florida story, is he has so much on the line, and he has made a decision that I have yet to see anybody agree with. I haven't seen Florida fans agree with it. I haven't seen any media come to his defense. By the way, I think Texas A&M fans are happy that they're not getting 60 minutes of DJ Lagway on Saturday. And so that's why he has so much at stake, because it's not only that he was presented with this wild decision, but I would argue that of the 3 choices that he could have made, start Graham Mertz and roll with them, start DJ Lagway and roll with them, or play both. I think you could argue he actually made the only decision that no one can defend, okay? Because just think about it, right? If he had decided we're rolling with Graham Mertz, you would have had people that disagree with it. I would have been one. But at the same time, the argument would have been there for Billy Napier. The young kid isn't ready. We love him, but we're never going to put him out there if we don't think he's prepared. His development comes before anything else. Even if my job is on the line, I would rather sacrifice my own job than force him out there before he's ready. Like that actually sounds like an incredible thing to say. By the way, you're also being very loyal to Graham Mertz. He came here. He had the 6th year of eligibility. He could have gone elsewhere. He came back to be part of this program. And as the old saying goes in football, we're not going to bench him just because of an injury. So that would have been the easy explanation if you decided to roll with Graham Mertz, but you didn't. By the way, the easier explanation would have been if you rolled with DJ Lagway. He's the future. He's the present. We love Graham. We appreciate everything he's done, but this is a win now situation for us. And Graham is going to have to deal with it. Graham's a big boy. Graham, by the way, wants to be a professional next year. This is a professional business decision for everybody involved. So those were kind of the 2 options. Billy Napier chose neither. And I was thinking about it today. Like, we know both quarterbacks are going to play, but what is actually the best case scenario for Billy Napier? Like, what is the scenario where everyone comes out feeling good about this, right? Because let's say Graham Mertz is awesome. Like, I don't think it's going to happen, but let's say he drives the length of the field on the opening drive, puts the Gators up 7-0, gets the ball back, drives again, puts them up 14-0. Well, then it's like, do you go to DJ Lagway? You said you're going to play both, but are you going to play both? But then the counter is, You can't not play DJ Lagway because you said you were going to. And then, of course, the reverse of that is true as well. Graham Mertz throws 2 picks. DJ Lagway comes in, leads a touchdown drive. Now, you can't go back to Graham Mertz, and you came out looking bad anyway. And so I just don't know what I don't know what the scenario coming out of Saturday is where we just all sit there and throw our hands up and say, Billy Napier was right. We were dead wrong. So it'll be interesting. We'll see what happens. But to me, there is absolutely nobody with more at stake than Billy Napier on Saturday. This is one he better get right, because if he doesn't, he's going to have a lot of questions to answer. Let's keep it going with the number 2 person that I believe has the most at stake. Well, not just person, but entity in college football that has the most at stake. It is my man, Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, and of course the Colorado Buffaloes. And if you've listened to this show, listen, I think I have been as big of a defender of Deion as anybody, okay? Listen, defended him when he left Jackson State, which some people were mad at him for. I said, you can't pass up a Power 5 opportunity. Defended him when he said, I'm bringing in my own luggage and it's Louis. Defended him when, by the way, they lost a couple games last year. They struggled. They were still 4-8. Defended him when he went back to the portal this past offseason. But at some point, the results have to happen on the field. And I think there's a couple things at stake here on Saturday for Coach Prime. First off, the product just has not been good, and it frankly does not look better, right? I mean, again, I was even defending Coach Prime after the North Dakota State game. Said the defense looked better, the offense wasn't very good, the offensive line wasn't very good, but you still got Shador, you still got Travis Hunter, and you look at this team. They don't look better than last year. You could argue in some ways they are worse than last year. The run game is worse, which means the O-line is not better. And oh, by the way, on top of that, here's the other variable, is that the defense, which looks improved on paper, isn't really, because we watched that Nebraska game last weekend. It was 28-10, I think was the final score. It wasn't even close. It wasn't even competitive. Nebraska let their foot off the gas. And that's where the issue comes in with Coach Prime on Saturday, is if you want to just argue, hey, maybe Nebraska is just better than we thought they were. Okay, fine. But here's the thing. Matt Rule is also in year 2. So if you're Coach Prime, you can't keep saying, I need more time. It's only year 2. We did this. It's like at some point, you got to win some games. And that's why, to me, Saturday is so important for Colorado and Deion Sanders. If you lose to Colorado State, there's a couple things that are at play. One, you not only lose, I think at that point, you sort of become irrelevant. And more importantly, I think you sort of become a laughingstock, okay? And beyond that, and here's where, I don't know if Coach Prime cares. He's got thick skin, whatever. But and by the way, I know people say, oh, he doesn't have thick skin. He argues with the media. That's another thing I defended him on. Thought some of the Denver Post stuff crossed the line, whatever. But if they lose on Saturday, there's a couple things. One, it's hard to see a scenario where they're any better than they were last year. Like they went 4-8 last year. They lose on Saturday. Find me 3 more wins on that schedule that you feel really good about Colorado in those games. Even worse, find me 5, because the goal from the beginning was bowl eligibility at minimum. So you lose this game, then the questions start to creep up. Is it really just daddy ball? Is it really just to promote Shador and Travis and some of the specific guys on this roster? But here's the other thing that I was thinking about today. If you lose this game and it goes really sideways, I think all the questions that a lot of people have been asking about Deion Sanders' future at Colorado, they all of a sudden start to make more sense, because that is yet another thing that I have defended Deion Sanders for. Is I have said repeatedly, I said, I don't believe that he's only there to promote his sons, and the second that his sons get draft eligible, he gets the heck out of there. I truly believe, and maybe I'm naive, and maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, and maybe I'm an idiot. I truly believe he loves coaching young men, developing young men, helping young men go from boy to man. I believe, it hurts him when you have a Cormani McLean situation, a kid that needs a male role model in his life that just doesn't listen and bounces. But you lose this game, you're 1-2, you're probably not getting bowl eligible. And after the season, both of your sons are gone. And on top of that, not only are both of your sons gone, you lost a first-round quarterback and the most dynamic athlete in college football. And so if you can't get bowl eligible with a first-round quarterback and Travis Hunter, what makes us think that it's going to be any better when they're gone? And so that's what's important. And I think the other thing I'm starting to kind of question everything bigger picture. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope he's in college football for a long time because he's good for college football. But the other thing I'm starting to think about is, like, remember this time last year it wasn't just about the wins, but there was always like recruiting news that came with it. Bryce Underwood, number one quarterback in America, 2025, took a bunch of visits out there. Jordan Seaton obviously visited. There was a moment where I remember Ryan Wingo, who's now at Texas, we thought he was going to go visit. Cam Coleman, who's now with producer Matt's Auburn Tigers, we thought was going to go visit. Feels to me like there's zero recruiting buzz. So that's on top of everything else. And last year, it was all new. But Coach Prime made it very clear, I have a plan. We're going to have this many high school kids, this many transfers, this many grad transfers. Now it just feels like, who are they even recruiting? Like who are the 5 stars, the difference makers that are going to be on campus anytime in the future? So it's fascinating to think about. You got to win this game if you're Colorado. You have to silence some of the doubters. Otherwise, it gets sideways. And I hate to say it, but I do think you become sort of a punching bag on the national scale. Since in true Torres fashion, I'm going long, I'll try to be quick on the next few. Number 3 in terms of most at stake on Saturday. I actually think it's the Alabama Crimson Tide. And so this is not where I'm going to go be uninformed and criticize Kalen DeBoer and he's in over his head and you could have lost to South Florida and you're terrible and what does it all mean? No. We've talked about it. If you go back to the South Florida game, basically both offensive tackles were out. Caden Proctor's been hurt. Elijah Pritchett, did not start, kind of got put in towards the end. You have Tyler Booker, an All-American guard, playing his first ever time at tackle. So I give Bama a pass here. But at some point, you do need to make sure that you're taking steps forward, because the standard may be, no pun intended, the standard Nick Saban, but the standard may be, hey, it's Kalen DeBoer's year 1. If you lose a game or 2, it's not a big deal. But if you struggle against Wisconsin, you can even win against Wisconsin. But if you struggle against Wisconsin, you win 17-13. I think we got to start having bigger pictures about what the ceiling of this team is. Because look at the schedule. We know who's coming to town 3 Saturdays from now for people who do not. Alabama plays at Wisconsin this weekend, bye next weekend. Then they host a little team called the Georgia freaking Bulldogs, okay? So Georgia's coming to town end of September. Obviously, you have to go to Tennessee. Maybe LSU isn't as good as we thought. We'll see on Oklahoma. There's a lot left on the schedule, but Missouri looks pretty good right now. And again, Tennessee and Georgia look really good. And so to me, I'm not saying you gotta give up on the season if you don't win 51-3. But I do think you're better than Wisconsin. You're more athletic than Wisconsin. You should be able to, if the offensive line is healthy, run the ball right at them. Now, listen, a lot of this depends on the offensive line. Kalen DeBoer did say earlier in the week that he expects them to play. But let's say for the sake of argument, they do play. You got to show some progress, not just because of Saturday, but because of the bigger picture of you got a lot still on your schedule, and there's going to be a lot at stake. You got to look good on Saturday. Let's keep it going. By the way, feel free, if you are listening, drop in the comment section who you believe has the most at stake this weekend. This guy might be a popular answer. Number 4 on my list, Mark Stoops. So we have done the 360 degrees on Mark Stoops this week, okay? And the bottom line is, if you're a Kentucky fan, you already know. But it was ugly on Saturday. It was funny. I was talking to some people throughout the week. I think it was maybe a little uglier last year than we remember. Remember, Kentucky lost to South Carolina last year going into the Louisville game. The fan base seemed frustrated. And you beat Louisville. Then you have the whole Texas A&M fiasco, and you end up coming back. And I think he won back over a lot of people during that process. But there were a lot of frustrated people probably mid to late November last year. And I think the South Carolina game brought a lot of that back up. You keep going through offensive coordinators. Every offseason, you tell us it's going to be different. It always looks the same. And so going into this weekend against Georgia, I'm not saying you got to beat Georgia because nobody thinks you're beating Georgia. But last year, what was it, like 51-10? If you get run out of your own building and it's embarrassing and not competitive, because I still expect, and Kentucky fans, tell me if I'm wrong, I still think they'll get a pretty good crowd on Saturday. Now, part of it, they got the number one team in the country coming in. But I think if you lose 51-0 or 51-3, and people, you're down 31-0 at halftime and people are heading to the parking lots, I think people are going to head to the parking lots, and I don't think they're coming back this year. I know Kentucky fans know this, but you still have at Ole Miss by the end of September before a bye. That's in addition to Tennessee. That's in addition to Texas. And it's almost like what we said about Billy Napier, is there just are not a lot of obvious wins on this schedule. Georgia, I'm not saying is one of them, but you cannot be embarrassed. By the way, we know the truth about Kentucky as well. New basketball coach, a lot of enthusiasm around the basketball program. I want to blame Kentucky fans. I'm not blaming anybody. If things get bad this weekend and beyond, you just invest all your time into basketball. Too high, number one recruiting class in the country, 2 Kentucky kids coming in basketball. The future seems bright. Everybody likes Mark Pope. Big Blue Madness is coming up here in a few weeks. You could lose this fan base and not get him back. Mark Stoops needs to be respectable. Not saying he needs to win, because to be clear, I don't think they're beating Georgia, but I do have them covering against Georgia. I think I said, what did I say? 27-10 was my prediction on a Wednesday night show. All right, finally, number 5, we'll take a quick break. We'll talk some realignment, sexy stuff, I know. Number 5, in terms of guys that just need some positivity. Who has the most at stake heading into week 3? Number 5 is Brian Kelly. And Brian Kelly, listen, I've said it a million times. I'm a Brian Kelly guy. He is a guy that I have followed his career. I don't want to say religiously, but, he was at Cincinnati when I was at UConn. He was the coach at Cincinnati when I was a student at UConn. And I followed his career since then. But this is the 3rd straight year. You lost on opening night. We heard the audio of him slamming his table on the desk. That's all well and good. But, you keep falling behind the 8 ball. And if you remember last year, they lost to Ole Miss in September as well. And the fan base was kind of out by the end of September. Now, Jaden Daniels brought him back in because he was so freaking awesome to watch. But at the same time, doesn't feel like there's a lot of positivity around Brian Kelly. It's funny. I'll go back to Billy Napier for a second. I have a buddy who's a Gator fan who told me, he said, Aaron, he said, it's not just that we barely win. There's been maybe one time in Billy Napier's tenure that I left the stadium even feeling good about the program. And I think you look at Brian Kelly, it hasn't been that bad, but you go back to the Bama game 2 years ago, that was obviously a great moment for that program. But there's also been a lot of times where if you win, it's not pretty, and obviously 3 straight losses. So if you are Brian Kelly, it goes without saying, you can't lose to South Carolina, but I'll take it a step further. Certainly can't lose because you still got Ole Miss, A&M, Bama, Oklahoma on the schedule. But you also, I just think you got to win and look good on the road. Win and look good. Win and have a reason for your fans to be excited about the rest of the season, because it's a little bit about what we've said about a lot of these guys. Even if you win this game, 27-24, but your defense can't get off the field and the run game's kind of a mess, I think fans are going to be more frustrated than I think maybe the average person would realize. So those are my 5, I guess you would call them entities because it's not people, that have the most at stake heading into week 3 of the college football season. Billy Napier, a clear number 1. Deion Sanders at number 2. We have Bama at 3. We also have, who else do we have? We have Mark Stoops, and we have Billy Napier. See some comments. Swamp Donkey says, fire Billy Napier. Scared money don't make money. Pay the buyout. And of course, we got a couple Kentucky fans referencing Mark Stoops. And Real Blue 24 said exactly what I just did. He said, you don't have to win, but it has to be competitive. They don't have a chance to prove anything again until the Ole Miss game, which is 3 weeks away from Saturday. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. When we come back, well, there was some realignment news on, Wednesday night? Not the sexiest realignment news. We're going to come back, talk a little bit about the new look Pac-12, but more importantly, if you're not a Washington State fan, don't tune out, because what I'm going to tell you is I believe there are only 2 realignment stories that matter in the big picture of college sports going forward. So we're going to talk about that. And then we are going to talk a little college hoops recruiting. It's the end of the week, bunch of big visits this weekend. quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Deion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So, want to go ahead and switch gears. And I got to ask you, where were you at 11:34 p.m. Eastern time when the next great realignment move in all of college sports dropped like a bombshell on Twitter? I am, of course, talking about Wednesday night. We got the news. The new look Pac-12, which as of right now has just two teams. It is no longer a two-team league, baby. That is right. Oregon State and Washington State, they've got friends at the table because Ross Dellinger was the first one to report it. And by about 9 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday, it was official. The Pac-12 went from a two-pack to a six-pack, baby. That is right. Two-pack to six-pack as Boise State, San Diego State, Colorado State, and Fresno State are joining the league here in a few years. And so, listen, I know there's a lot of shows that have reacted to it. I'm not really going to hit on this because I will say I do think it's interesting, and I do want to very quickly give credit to Oregon State and Washington State because I think they made a very smart strategic move demanding and basically saying, if you all abandon us, that's fine, but we're keeping that Pac-12 logo, branding, whatever. Because what ended up happening was the Pac-12 was still owed a lot of money from NCAA tournaments in the past, from college football playoffs. Remember, Washington made the national championship game a year ago. And so those other schools thought, oh, we're going to leave, but we're going to get a check on the way out. And Washington State and Oregon State said, no. We're still the Pac-12. They keep the branding. That, by the way, is what has allowed them to add some of these teams. But at the same time, let me also say this. There's an old saying in life, can't put lipstick on a pig. I believe that is the saying. And when I look at the news of the Pac-12, adding 4 teams from the Mountain West, I'll just be transparent. It feels like lipstick on a pig. Boise State, San Diego State, Colorado State, Fresno State. Congrats to you guys. You're moving on up in the world just a little bit. But at the end of the day, this is just basically the Mountain West with 2 new teams, Oregon State and Washington State. They're calling it the Pac-12. Doesn't change the fact that it is not the Pac-12. There's no UCLA. There's no USC. There's no Oregon. There's no Arizona. I hate to say it, but I was thinking about Bill Walton on Monday morning. What would he have thought about all this? No longer with us, obviously, but it's crazy. But I just, it's hard for me to get excited because it doesn't really change anything. It's just the Mountain West with 2 new schools. It doesn't change the format of the postseason, doesn't change the format of anything. And so it got me thinking, I could do 10 minutes on what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. And so instead, what I want to do is kind of switch gears and do something different because I was thinking, this is just lipstick on a pig, but what are the realignment moves that actually in the grand scheme of things could matter? What are the realignment moves that actually would impact college sports on a granular level? Because at this point, the SEC is pretty much set, the Big Ten is pretty much set, and everyone's just moving around the deck chairs to try and have some sort of seat at the table. And it struck me. There's really only two big moves left. It's whenever the ACC breaks up, what happens to the 3, 4, 5 teams that everybody wants. And then, of course, what is the future of Notre Dame football? And I say that respectfully to my alma mater, UConn. Say it respectfully to Gonzaga. Say it respectfully to some of these other schools moving in different places. The only moves that shake college sports to the core and get us to this finish line of whatever college sports is going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years is those two moves. The ACC, I'll be honest, is absolutely fascinating to me. And I'll tell you why. It's because we've talked about it time and again. We don't need to get into all the politics of it, but the ACC has a TV contract that is set through 2036, okay? 12 more years tying those two schools together. And I've said it a million times, is that when I look at that grant of rights for the ACC, just transparently, everybody signed it, and it feels like something that it's going to be hard to get out of because it's what everybody wanted in the moment that it's signed. But if you ask people in the college sports industry, I'll also be transparent with you. People think this thing is going to fall apart. People think that the schools that want out of this contract are going to be able to get out of it. And people think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. There are high-profile people in college sports that I know of that believe that within the next year, teams will be able to get out of this deal from the ACC, and then we get another wave of absolute chaos in college sports. What'll be interesting, by the way, and we don't have to spend too much time on this, is what actually happens with everybody. Because I think there's this notion like Florida State, Clemson, where are they going? What does it all mean? Blah, blah, blah. Couple things. One, everyone you talk to in the space, North Carolina is actually the most coveted priority of any of these schools, okay? North Carolina, probably Virginia. They're great academic schools, which appeals to the Big Ten. You know, all the tweed jacket wearing school presidents at Wisconsin and Northwestern and Michigan that want to rub elbows with other, smart intellectual, whatever. They're intrigued by North Carolina. They're intrigued by Virginia. And then the SEC, of course, those are two bordering states to the SEC footprint that Greg Sankey would like to add. I don't even think he's been quiet about that. I think he's whatever. Obviously, it would be fascinating to see what happens with Clemson and Florida State. Listen, it's easy for these conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, to say, oh, no, we have no interest. Let's see what happens if those two are actually available. Now, the knock on them is that from an academic perspective, they're not as good as Carolina. They're not as good as Virginia. Does that limit interest in the Big Ten? And then from the SEC already has a footprint, already has somebody in North Carolina or in South Carolina with South Carolina and in Florida with the University of Florida. And so the question becomes, would Florida State and Clemson actually add anything to the situation for the SEC? So those two are very interesting from that perspective. I don't know that the landing spot will be as soft as people think. It's, by the way, why the Big 12 believes that they have a shot to land Florida State and Clemson, because those would actually be a real priority and upgrade for them. But I'm also curious what would happen with everybody else, because this Oregon State, Washington State situation that we all lived through and we all felt bad for those two schools, whenever the ACC breaks up, I think there's a lot more schools that end up without a chair at the big boy table than people realize, and a lot more schools that end up without a chair than schools that do end up with a chair. Carolina is going to be fine. Clemson, Florida State, probably Duke, because of basketball and the academic standing, is going to be fine. But Boston College, I don't know. Wake Forest, I don't know. Pitt, I don't know. Syracuse, I don't know. So I'm just bringing all this up to just say that's the big chess piece in realignment. It's not Washington State and Oregon State. It's to see, it's to kind of just see what would happen with those schools as well, because I think that there is a good chance that it could get ugly for a lot of those ACC schools. Really quickly, should mention, by the way, the other big chess piece is obviously Notre Dame, right? Notre Dame at some point is going to join a conference, and by the way, the second the ACC breaks up, they're almost screwed because they have this alliance with the ACC that has them playing 6-7 ACC schools a year. You start looking at their schedules in the future. it's very ACC heavy. I mean, you can look at the schedule this year. I mean, outside of Northern Illinois, who they just played, all of a sudden Notre Dame's got problems with them. Look at the schedule. Final couple weeks of the year versus, Louisville at home, Stanford, which remember is an ACC team now at home, Georgia Tech on a neutral field, Florida State, Virginia. I mean, that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right there, right on the schedule. So if the ACC breaks up, that scheduling alliance falls apart. And I think the bigger question is, I don't really understand what incentive the Big Ten and the SEC really has to schedule Notre Dame going forward. So it's just an interesting thought. We don't need to spend too much time on it. But to me, those are the two real domino pieces in realignment that matter. What happens to Florida State? What happens to Clemson? What happens to the ACC in general? And when does Notre Dame join a conference? Those are the ones that matter. Don't be fooled. Listen, a couple things. Don't be fooled. Washington State, Oregon State added 4 teams to the Pac-12. Again, we can call it the 6-pack now. But once you get past those teams, they're going to add more. I would have to assume UNLV will get an invite at some point, whatever. And then the Mountain West will backfill with other schools, but it doesn't matter. Just keep an eye on the ACC. Keep an eye on Notre Dame. Those are the ones that matter. Really quickly, again, make sure to drop your comments into the comment section. We'll get to them at the end of the show. What I want to do now, I do want to go ahead and wrap on actually a little bit of college hoops recruiting. And we obviously haven't done much college hoops because, let's be honest, it's football season. But at the same time, this is actually a very interesting time in college hoops recruiting. Because of the fact that, it's quiet, everybody's focused on football, but your coach, your favorite coach, is scouring the country. He's in high school gyms. He's talking to coaches. He's traveling. He's doing whatever. He's this, that, the other thing. And there's some stuff that is quietly happening behind the scenes. And I just figured it's a Friday. It's a little bit quieter. We did a lot of heavy lifting in football. Let's just get to some basketball recruiting notes from the week. First off, a lot of kids committing. I think there are two players that are kind of significant. One, we did get a 5-star commitment actually on Thursday afternoon, and that's because Isaiah Harwell, a 5-star in the class of 2025, was down to Gonzaga, I believe Cal, and Houston. Actually did commit to Houston. So a very nice pickup for Kelvin Sampson. This kid's kind of an interesting story. You feel bad for him because he was at one point one of the elite players in the high school class of 2025, suffered an injury last year, missed all of the summer this past year. And really, I think just people kind of forgot about him, right? And so it was interesting. I actually saw that Houston even tried to convince him to reclassify so that he could rehab on campus, probably not play this year, but get ready for the 25-26 season. He's staying in high school. He wants to play in high school, but this is a McDonald's All-American caliber talent. 6'6", super athletic, super skilled. As I said, a player that, in my opinion, really is flying under the radar just because he did not play all summer, and you saw other kids with a chance to step up. So he commits to Houston. Also worth noting, a 6'7" wing named Amari Allen just committed to Nate Oates in Alabama, their first commitment of the class of 2025. I was a little surprised by this one, only because Nate Oates in that Alabama program, that program is so high profile that I just don't know that, the kid's like a fringe 4-star, ranked 65th or so in the country. Not criticizing Nate Oates. He knows more about basketball than I do. But obviously, he is going to have access to a lot of talent in the portal. They have a loaded roster this year. And I don't know if I was him, unless it was like a surefire one and done. I don't know that I'd be taking kids this early because, again, is this the kind of kid that's going to come in as a freshman and have an immediate impact? The alternative is, if he doesn't, is that a kid that you keep for a year and then you lose to the portal? Still, he's a very, very high upside, very talented kid. Don't want to undersell if Nate Oates is taking him. Credit where it's due. But he did commit to Alabama earlier this week. All right, let's get to a little bit of the gossip. I say it before, I'll say it again. In Spanish, we call it chisme, the gossip. And this is where it gets interesting. I do want to start with the now 2-time defending national champion UConn Huskies, because I'll tell you this, okay? So I would say of every question or conversation that the questions that I get every single day, tagged on Twitter, DMs, whatever. Torres, why hasn't UConn gotten a commitment from anybody? What does it mean? Should I be worried? Who's committing? When? And to be clear, Dan Hurley has a track record. He's always been able to land kids, especially in the summertime. Last year, Ahmad Noel and Isaiah Abraham, the two freshmen this year, outside of Liam McNeely, were actually committed by this time. Previous years, you had 3, 4, 5 kids in the 2023 class committed, including Steph Castle. And it just hasn't happened. And what I keep telling UConn fans, I'll just be honest, in this new NIL portal world, I just think it's going to be harder to get kids to commit early and to keep kids too, transparently. And I think a lot of people think it's just the NIL stuff. It's not just NIL. It's the fact that, remember, so much roster building in college basketball is done now in April and May. And so I've talked to parents, I've talked to AAU coaches, I've talked to kids that are just like, dude, listen, I like this school. I might love this school. I might be ready to commit to this school. And it's not even an NIL thing. It's they think they know who's coming back, but weird stuff happens in April. A kid blows up, he declares, all of a sudden the roster looks different than I was expecting. A kid doesn't blow up and he's coming back because the NIL is too good. Now all of a sudden my spot isn't, whatever. And so I just think it's going to take a little bit longer to get a lot of these kids committed. Isaiah Harwell, by the way, I think he's only the third of the top 25 to commit. So it's taking a little bit longer than normal. And I don't think that's going to change. I think we're going to see more players get into April and May before they make their decisions. But I bring it up because I will add this. Well, I don't know that a decision is imminent. It is very clear that UConn is prioritizing a kid named Eric Ryby, 7-foot center from the DC area. Okay. So they're prioritizing a lot of kids. They had Braylon Mullins on campus a few weeks ago, 4-star guard from Indiana. They've had Malik Thomas on campus, but Eric Ryby is a kid that they are very clearly prioritizing. He took a visit last weekend, but did you see what Dan Hurley and his staff did with this kid earlier this week? So Dan Hurley and the UConn Huskies, as is tradition with national champions, you get to visit the White House, okay? By the way, this is not political commentary. This is just what happens. They visit the White House. They meet the president. They take a bunch of pictures. And did you see where Dan Hurley, Kamani Young, and Luke Murray went from right from the White House? Producer Matt, do we have the tweet from Adam Zagoria? Look at that. That is Dan Hurley and Kamani Young still in the suit that they wore at the White House, seeing Eric Ryby, who is a DC area kid. And so you talk about the prioritization of this kid. There is zero doubt in my mind that Dan Hurley and UConn are full speed ahead. Worth noting, by the way, Dan Hurley and UConn also visited a 4-star guard named McCaden Lewis, also in the DC area that day. But if that doesn't show you the priority, I don't know what is. Eric Ryby, by the way, very interesting, was once, felt like a Creighton lean, replaced Ryan Kalkbrenner. Got interesting because he blew up over the summer, visited UConn, has now visited Kansas, going to visit Indiana next weekend. And I'll just say this, Indiana actually has a very big recruiting weekend a week from now. They have Braylon Mullins, a 4-star guard who I just mentioned, who UConn really wants, who Kentucky really wants, and who Indiana, among others, really wants. He will be on campus. Eric Ryby will be on campus. A 4-star named Trent Silsby, who was originally from Indiana, now playing at Montverde, will be on campus. So that is a major recruiting weekend for them. Don't know how close Ryby is, but it does feel like that recruitment is starting to pick up, and it is very clear that Dan Hurley wants that kid. By the way, the Braylon Mullins kid, everybody has been in to see him this week. Mark Pope was in to see him. Dan Hurley was in to see him. So that's another name to keep an eye on. A couple other interesting notes before we get out of here. Thought this was interesting. Arkansas, John Calipari, you may have heard of him. One of the few teams that actually does have a high-profile 5-star commitment for the class of 2025. Saw on Thursday, 2 visits are set up in the coming weeks for marquee players. And by the way, this was also the weekend that Malik Thomas, the 5-star guard, was supposed to visit as well. But among the visitors is depending on the recruiting service, maybe a 4-star, maybe a 5-star, but a kid by the name of Kingston Flemings is expected to visit in a couple weeks. He's a 5-star in some services, 4 in another. Why that is important to me is that Arkansas already has a commitment from a point guard in the 2025 class in Darius Acuff. Top 5 player. We talked about him when he committed. We talked about the impact that he could have. But what this says to me is that John Calipari, who throughout his career, some of his best teams have had multiple ball handlers. Go back to the book that I wrote on the 2010 team. John Wall and Eric Bledsoe. Pretty good backcourt. Both could handle the ball. Obviously, last year at Kentucky, Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham, DJ Wagner could all handle the ball. This year at Arkansas, DJ Wagner, Boogie Flan, John L. Davis can all handle the ball. And so when I look at Calipari's approach, what is obvious to me, he is not afraid, and apparently the kids aren't afraid either because they're intrigued enough to take the visits. He's not afraid to say, hey, come here. More than one of you can have the ball in your hands. But I think this speaks to kind of how he wants to play. Probably a little bit faster, much like he did this past year at Kentucky, get up and down a little bit more. But you have to have, Calipari has always had his best success with multiple guards. And so the fact that Kingston Flemings, who, Houston wants, Baylor wants, some of these Texas schools wants, he's originally from Texas, that says to me, Cal ain't playing around. And Cal, listen, they're going to go after their big guys. Chris Sinak is one of a 5-star who's going to be visiting at some point. There's a couple others. But it feels obvious to me that Cal is not only not afraid to play multiple point guards, but that he clearly wants to bring in multiple point guards in this class. We'll see if he can close the deal. This kid is expected to visit in mid to late October, I believe. Lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about Mark Pope and Kentucky. And Kentucky is one of the few schools they are out ahead in 2025. They already have two kids committed. Both are from the state of Kentucky. Jasper Johnson, we talked about a week ago. Malachi Moreno, we talked about previously. But I just bring it up because, listen, I think they're not only do I think, they're still going after guys. 5-star Caleb Wilson is visiting this week. Braylon Mullins, I mentioned him like 4 times already. He's going to be he's a priority. I think he's coming for Big Blue Madness in a few weeks. But I bring it up, by the way, make sure you're following the Torres on UK account because we have a lot of recruiting news there. Why I want to talk Mark Pope, why I want to talk Kentucky, this is why, is because to me, there is a very interesting thing that has happened over the last couple days. One, they did offer Taj I got to make sure I get the name right. Taj Ariza, okay? And I didn't want to say the name wrong because I watched his dad play in the NBA for like 15 years. That's Trevor Ariza's son. He's an LA kid. First off, think that speaks to, Jason Hart's impact. Jason Hart is a guy that we've talked about a lot on this show. He was at LSU. He was at USC. And he is a guy that, listen, I got to know him a little bit when he was at USC. I loved being around him. He's a great coach. He is a great evaluator. And I think they're really prioritizing a lot of West Coast kids, which is something that's his area of expertise, a place that he knows well. He knows the LA area well. He's from LA, etc. But they did offer Taj Ariza the other day. They did offer, by the way, a kid by the name of Jason Crow, who some believe is one of the best players in that class as well, who's also from the LA area. But I also saw this, and this to me is just an interesting trend to monitor and to follow. Over the next couple days, not just days, but weeks, months, years, is this. Mark Pope actually handed out a few offers in the class of 2027 this week. Okay, so 2025, they're out ahead. 2026, they prioritized a few kids, like I said, Jason Crow, Taj Ariza, etc. But the 2027 kids are interesting for this reason. Listen, I'm not going to start breaking down high school sophomores, haven't even played their sophomore year yet. But why I find this interesting, so much of the early part of the Mark Pope era, it is obvious he just does things differently than Cal. How much of it is intentional, how much of it isn't, I don't know. But basically everything. He wants to play differently. He wants to recruit differently. He wants to lean into the portal. He wants to do just everything differently. And that's okay. Everybody needed a fresh start. This isn't an indictment on Cal. But one of the things that I do think was a fair criticism of Cal towards the end of Kentucky is I thought he really, and it wasn't just me, it was Kentucky fans, waited entirely too long to evaluate and offer kids in high school. And basically Cal's stance was pretty straightforward. It was like, we're Kentucky. I'm Cal. I'm not offering a kid as a sophomore. Now, part of it I sort of understand, right? Because that Kentucky offer was so valuable that, if you take a commitment from a kid at, 16 years old and he isn't good by the time he's a senior, you're kind of screwed. So I sort of understood it, but it felt like too often they were getting involved in recruitments just too late, right? There was a famous story. They offered Kyle Filipowski of all people, and a day later he commits to Duke. And it was kind of like an embarrassing thing. It was like, dude, you didn't know that he was on the doorstep of committing to Duke. You're coming in late thinking you're just going to get a seat at the table. So why I find the Pope thing interesting is because he is evaluating early. He is trusting his evaluations. He is trusting his assistant coaches. I just told you about Jason Hart. Alvin Brooks III is awesome as well. But he's trusting those evaluations. And he's saying, I'm not afraid to offer a kid who's 15 years old. I'm not afraid to be the first offer. I'm not afraid to be one of the first offers. And it's just a completely different stance than the previous coaching staff. So I bring it up because they're in really good shape for 2025. I think the priority is, again, Braylon Mullins. Maybe at some point we just do a separate segment on him because I talk about him enough in this one. But that is an interesting thing at Kentucky that I just find to be very fascinating. The way that he has really gotten ahead, Mark Pope, that is, on the classes that are, 2-3 years out. All right, really quickly, producer Matt, any questions? I see the chat, a couple people in the chat, couple things, what do we got? We got one question about the college football weekend ahead. I think the Razorbacks beat UAB. So we're just talking about Arkansas basketball. Leslie says, I think the Razorbacks beat UAB 63-10, and I think will be 4-1 when they play Tennessee. Well, if they're 4-1, that means that producer Matt, who is an Auburn alum and an Auburn season ticket holder, has seen a second loss at Jordan-Hare Stadium by the end of September, because Arkansas goes to Jordan-Hare in just a few weeks, and they also, by the way, play Texas A&M on a neutral. By the way, producer Matt has gotten in my ear. He says Arkansas will beat Auburn on the road. This is what I'll say about Arkansas. I actually think they're good. Taylor Green is really good, but you got to close out games. And seeing the reaction to the Arkansas-Oklahoma State game this past weekend, it was obvious to me the frustration isn't just that you lost. It's that the Sam Pittman era has been about closing out games when you have the opportunity to close out and you just don't do it. And so from the Arkansas perspective, I think that's where it gets kind of interesting is, you just got to close out games, because you watched Oklahoma State. They were the better team. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they're better than Auburn. We'll see A&M. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that you're better than A&M, but you got to close out these games. Leslie says Arkansas could be 4-1 going into the Tennessee game. I don't think that is crazy, but again, you got to close things out. Arkansas, of course, plays UAB on Saturday. UAB coming off a 32-6 loss to UL Monroe. So my man Trent Dilfer, I don't know what's going on over there. All right. Ooh, good last question. Gil McGarity, do you see Memphis moving to a Power 5 conference? I don't want to say it's a regret because there's so much football going on, but the Penny Hardaway stuff with Memphis basketball is fascinating. First of all, again, I don't know what the power conferences are going to look like. If you miss the realignment conversation, the Big 12, Big 10 and the SEC are on their own tier right now. The Big 12, I believe, has established itself as the clear third best conference. The ACC, it feels like the four biggest brands are trying to get out. And then I don't know what happens with everybody else. And so for Memphis, I just don't know where you land. Now, the one thing that Memphis has going for it, and I do think this matters more and more, I believe, listen, they have the NIL, and it's obviously a lot to do with FedEx. They have the NIL to compete with the highest level of teams. And so the one thing we've learned in realignment time and time again, how do you get a seat at the table? You keep, excuse my language, cover earmuffs if you got kids in the car. You kick ass and take names. TCU, when I started watching college football, was irrelevant. Then Gary Patterson was awesome. They got hot at the right time. The Big 12 needed more teams. Boom, they add him. Houston was irrelevant forever. Kelvin Sampson gets him to a Final Four. The football program's heading in the right direction. At the time they were paying Dana Holgorsen a ton of money. Boom, they get an invite to the Big 12. So, I look at it and it's hard for me to say definitively, but I do think, listen, if there's in 10 years, 20 years, whatever, if there is anything beyond the Big 10 and the SEC, I think Memphis will be in the mix because, to their credit, their fans care way too much about that program to see them fail. The football program, I think they could upset Florida State. That was a game that we did not preview on this week's pod. I'm not betting for or against Florida State, just not doing it. You upset Florida State, you have the inside track to that G5 trip to the playoff. Maybe you become that consistent Gonzaga G5 representative, whatever. And then whenever that next domino falls, maybe you get in the mix. But what I was going to say, by the way, I said a little bit of a regret. That Penny Hardaway story is wild. Okay. So Penny Hardaway, for people who missed it, fired 4 assistant coaches about a week ago now. It's clear there's another NCAA thing kind of hanging over the program. I know Memphis fans love Penny. This feels like it's the end. I think this is his last year. And I'll be transparent. I think that's a very intriguing job in basketball because whatever this big breakoff is in college sports, it isn't going to happen right away. And if you're, I'm just throwing out a name, but if you're one of these bottom half of the SEC programs where you're just fighting and scratching to get to 9th, 10th place, like a Chris Jans at Mississippi State, like a Chris Beard at Ole Miss. You don't want to go to Memphis where you have every advantage and you could run that league the way that Calipari did 20 years ago. So I'd be very curious if that job opens. By the way, Will Wade, he's getting a bump up here sometime soon. So if that job were to open, it would be absolutely fascinating. But yeah, whatever the next version of college sports is, Penny Hardaway or Memphis, I think will be in pretty good shape. All right, I think that's it for this Friday edition of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. If you are not subscribed to the show, please make sure to do so. You can do it on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get podcasts. Please make sure to do so. Also, make sure you are subscribed on YouTube. We go live 3 times a week. We will be back on Sunday night. And we're going to have plenty to discuss on Sunday because we're going to have a good weekend in college football. We don't know what the storylines will be, but I promise they will be good. If you're not subscribed, make sure to do so. Also, thank you to our partners, Collie Puffs and ColliePuffs.com. ColliePuffs.com is where you want to get these. Again, this is the healthy alternative to the snacks that you are currently eating. Help your boy out. Help Torres out. ColliePuffs.com for more information. Time for me to go. Time for me to get out of here. I very much appreciate everybody's support, and I will be back on Sunday night. Shout out to Torrent. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick, you F-head. Unblock me, bro. I will be back